which agent? We're going to look a little bit now about online estate agents versus high street estate agents. And, traditionally to sell your property, you would need to appoint an estate agent to do it. But times are changing. So let's look at the online pros. So if we look at the online estate agents, over 20,000 searches per month for online estate agents alone, on Google alone, and growing. Okay. I think latest figures show us that 95% of property searches begin online through portals like Rightmove and Zoopla. Interestingly enough, a report from the National Association of Estate Agents recently said that 80% of high street agents believe that their presence won't even be necessary in the next 3 to 5 years. And this comes back to the point we were mentioning earlier, is that with London being a very busy marketplace, with the internet being the biggest possible marketplace in the world, does there really need to be a physical location which people actually don't really walk into anyway? And as I say, if you think that's not true, then do feel free, if you've got time, to go along the high street and actually see how many people are actually sitting in estate agents' offices talking about property. I used to run one of the biggest offices in North London, in Islington, and we had a treble shop front, big reception area, sofas, couches, receptionist, and I can tell you that we got probably about 2 people a week walking in off Upper Street. And Upper Street in Islington, for those that know it, is one of the busiest high streets in London. So it just goes to show that actually 80% of high street agents do believe that the physical location of their offices will have no bearing on their ability to sell a property within the next 3 to 5 years. And of course, the biggest attraction really for an online estate agent is the low fee attached to it. So, low fees equals low overhead. We're not paying for estate agents' overheads, and the low fees are normally an attractive proposition for online agents. So, looking at the online portals, of course, when we go with an agent, we want them to make sure that they are advertising us where we need to be. So I think Globrix is now owned by Zoopla, but we'll see, we've got the big guys there, Rightmove and Zoopla and Google. I think there's a new one as well, onthemarket.com, which I don't think anybody's ever heard of. So we've looked at the pros for, selling with an online agent, but let's look at the cons. So we understand that the main benefit of selling our property with an online agent is primarily, let's face it, fee related. We're not going to pay as much to an online agent as we are to, let's say, a high street agent. But let's look at the drawbacks. And I think for this, we need to go back to our list of what we expect from an agent. So I think it's fair to say that we get a lack of expertise. We get a lack of individual knowledge about our location, maybe about the marketplace, or the economy. It's often a one-size-fits-all service. We get a lack of service. Often sellers, in return for the low fees that they're paying, will have to do their own viewings. And that often means negotiating themselves with their buyers. It could also mean lack of marketing. Understand what you're actually getting from your low fee. The low fee may be interesting, but is that because the online agent necessarily isn't spending the money necessary to get your property where it needs to be? We get that lack of protection. We talked about this protection earlier, the things that are important to us. Sellers will often be left to fend for themselves. Direct contact with buyers is never a good thing. We suffer a lack of protection. They will have a lack of understanding. We haven't spoken to them in great detail. Do they have any real insight into our own position, into our own drivers, into our own emotions, into our own feelings about what's driving our selling campaign? They will often be lack of accessibility. You won't be dealing with a specific agent. You'll be dealing probably with either a call center or a generic email help address, which again probably isn't the kind of accessibility that you're looking for. And of course, we suffer from a lack of strategic advice. So all the things that we actually decided earlier that we wanted with an estate agent, we actually find ourselves lacking all of these things via the online model. Okay, so if we look at the pros of selling with the high street, again, we go back to the things that we expect our high street or corporate agents to provide us. So the expertise, the service, the marketing, the trust, the value for money, the accessibility, the strategic advice, the protection, and the understanding. But actually, by the same token, this isn't always the case. And if you look at the list of cons for selling with the high street agents, so what are the cons? Because it's not all that it's cracked up to be. So the first things that we see, that we pay high fees, and the agency fee covers overheads, because in effect you're not paying. The reason that there's such differential between a low cost online agent versus a traditional high street agent is that the online agent doesn't have to cover overheads such as staff costs, rents, equipment, central costs, motor expenses, shareholders, etc. I mean, you go into somewhere like Foxtons, who have the highest estate agents charges in the industry, and you might think it's wonderful getting a bottle of water or a free cappuccino, but what you're paying for that actually is more than covered in your fee. So we find the high fee model associated with the high street agents basically means that you're paying for agents to cover their overheads. The rigid model. Quite often the corporate agents don't have fluidity. They are rigid in terms of targets that they have to meet. They are rigid in their service level offerings. They are rigid in maybe the times that they are open. So quite often we're faced with a rigid business model. We're also faced with a lack of continuity. And by this I mean, often in the larger estate agents, we're not dealing with the same person that we dealt with at the beginning. So the person that we spoke to in the first instance that we quite liked and we thought understood us and met a lot of the values that we find important, all of a sudden now we've been passed over to the sales team, or we're now dealing with sales negotiators as opposed to valuers, and it's this lack of continuity that is unsettling and inefficient. So in America, where I spent some time in Manhattan, the Realtor type service that you get there is that you hire your Realtor to act for you every step of the way. And I think this is the kind of service that really the London market is crying out for. So, we have a lack of continuity even with the larger corporate agents. With a lack of continuity obviously follows a lack of expertise, and you can still, and I've just gone back to our list of perceived pros and I've just reversed it. All of the pros that we think that we're getting from high street agents can actually also be cons. You can just as easily find a lack of expertise, just as you can receive terrible service, bad marketing, a lack of protection, lack of understanding, a lack of accessibility, and a lack of strategic advice. And again, this does come back down to the expertise levels, the service levels associated with these companies. So, there's no guarantee that just going with the high street model is going to lock in all of these factors that we find important. So, what's the answer here? We're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. So I'm going to ask a very simple question here, and it's a point that I think at this moment in time we kind of need to think about. So do we need a fresh approach? Now here's a question. If you, as a potential seller, could find an agent who fulfilled all of those criteria, all of those things that you want, such as the service, the continuity, the expertise, the marketing, the protection, the understanding, the accessibility, the strategic advice, the trust, the expertise, the confidence. If you can find an agent who fulfilled all of those things, how important is the company they work for? And there's a very, very good question. What we're looking for is really the agent as opposed to the agency perhaps. And I think if you could find an agent who fulfilled all of those things that you wanted, how important does brand become? How important is the company that they work for? And I think the best example I came across was that of Keller Williams, so the company, the biggest franchise real estate company in North America. They've got 700 what they call market centers. And reading a testimony from Gary Keller, the very successful owner of Keller Williams, believes that the brand doesn't have anything to do with selling property successfully. They believe in good networking, best practice, protection of the client. And if you can fulfill all the criteria that we think is important to offer, potential sellers as clients, the brand actually is secondary. And I think this really is summed up by, if you ever visit North America and you want to sort of appoint a realtor, you'll find most of them working from home in very small rented offices. You're certainly not going to be walking along, a high street, with 20 or 30 agents to walk into. There are brokerage firms that rent small office space, they keep overheads down, but it makes no difference to their ability to market their property for you. And you get to deal with the same person from start to finish. And I think that really is the kind of service that I know I would want as a potential seller. So very interesting there. And I think it's a question, I've certainly asked in my seminars. And the answer is always, well, actually, if I could find an agent who ticked all of that criteria, I don't give a rat's behind as to, who the company is that they work for. And I think that's the right way to look at it. We're looking for an agent. We're not looking for an agency. And I think that's, if we go back to our list of wants and needs, the things that we expect from an agent, I think it's very difficult to find all of those things across an agency. We lose continuity, we lose expertise, and we lose service.